Hi, this is Damien Marie AtHope, and I'm an Axiological Atheist. And I'm here with my guest. Could you please tell us your name and what kind of atheist you are?
Aloha, I'm Cherie Olivia Anondananda, and I am an agnostic atheist.
Okay.
Sometimes I refer to myself as an up-atheist, an atheist, and my personal preference would be to be totally theologically non-cognitive. As in, there was no more of this silly mythology, except as an alternative to perhaps the Cat in the Hat.
I happen to know what an agnostic with an I is and what non-cognitivism is. Could you please tell people that they may not know?
Okay. The theological non-cognitivism first, which is, I guess, the last term that I introduced, means non-cognitivism, not thinking about theology. So I'd rather it just wasn't a thought, wasn't something that I had to deal with, wasn't something that I had to consider, because it doesn't make any sense to me at all. Adiamorphic atheist, which was something I used to call myself quite often. Adiamorphic is a generic term that some people equate with atheist. Just means I'm without a God. I'm without any of that trapping. Atheist means I don't care what your belief in, spiritual or phenomenological things are. I really don't care to hear about it, and I certainly don't care to debate about what your inner world dictates is true. Because that's your business. What's inside my head is what's my business. To the extent that what's inside your head might affect another person or myself through behavior is another story altogether. That's outside your head. But what's inside your head is your business. Then all the way back to Ignostic, or even atheist. And that is the idea that the questions being presented, is there a God, are absurd questions to begin with, because the terms are so vague and so non-defined. What is God? What is the definition of God? And once you get into a definition, then is it actually a proposition that is falsifiable, or is it just something that we made up, fluffy and imaginary? We can all do those kinds of things with any number of things. And the fact that this particular imaginary agency happens to be attributed to the allness, the everything, why don't we just say everything instead of God? It's just a substitute word, in my opinion. And I was talking just a little bit before we started about the idea that the whole definition of most of the Abrahamic religions tends to be this, in the ontological argument, this maximally supreme being who is omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, and I think that's a lesser God than one that would be omnipresent if we're defining something of that nature, because that would include omnibenevolent and omnimalevolent. It doesn't have to yield evil to someone else, and that particular God would kick the omnibenevolent God's ass, because it could, and it would want to. But if you start saying everything, omnipresence, it becomes a moot point. Why not just say everything and explore all of the details and use the word reality with a capital R, that we're all exploring as an objective state, that we all have subjective experience, and through our sharing of the subjective experience, we get to understand better. We get different points of view that give us a better ascertainment of what reality actually is. I think that has a lot to do with your axiological position and the methodology involved there, particularly the strong use of deductive reasoning over inductive reasoning.
Correct.
As someone whose background is primarily psychology, with a great deal of interest in cognitive science in general, as well as neuroscience as the basis for the emerging phenomenon of consciousness, or emergent, I should say, not emerging. I don't have the same philosophical grounding, and because there are so many gaps, I'm not going to induce a deity or a spiritual supernatural force, but I am going to use a lot of inductive reasoning and then pare away at it to the best I can with logic and reason to find natural explanations for things that we've previously attributed to spiritual or deity phenomenon.
Excellent. I really appreciate you explaining all that, and I think you did a very eloquent job. Yeah, when I agree with you, I do hold rationalism to be above, in a sense, or first and more easily demonstratable than inductive reasoning. Although I do absolutely believe in inductive reasoning, not just deductive, and I also believe in abductive reasoning. But the issue to me is that at any point, any fact has to be mentally understood. No fact of science is devoid of a rational understanding of it. I mean, if I just threw a whole bunch of bones on a table, you wouldn't know it was a dinosaur unless you used some form of deductive reasoning that where it was placed, the fact that these all go together. I mean, in a sense, to me, so I'm definitely not. I'm pro science, 100%. So, I mean, I don't want when you say that, I don't want people to misunderstand that I definitely am not. Against evidence. I love evidence. To me, no rational fact can be validated 100% without having the backing of, to me, the evidence. So, I want to put that aside for right now. I wanted to ask you, so were you always this way, or was this the way you think, or was it something that came about, and did you have a religious childhood?
Interestingly enough, I have really only come to this particular position in the last couple of years. I professed agnosticism for 35 years. At 10 years old, I was a declared atheist. At 15 years old, on LSD, I had some experiences that exceeded my ability to explain at the time, and that I sociography. I also I broke down defenses because of using that psychoactive chemical, that I didn't have the proper support environment to work through, and there was some very raw emotion from early childhood traumatization that had been blocked out, sexual and physical abuse that had been pretty much blocked out. So when I hit that emotive bubble, if you will, what happened was a need for defense again from myself. I need to compartmentalize, to block it out. And as a result, I started believing that there was something. of me, something that was concerned with my well-being, concerned with all well-being, concerned with the progress of life, and so forth. Rather woo, not necessarily particularly religiously inclined, but the idea that there was, well, at one point I was able to rationalize it down to just a collective psychic phenomenon of human beings, and the fact that people believed and put their energy out there made this thing. So yes, God.
That's interesting.
It was created, but it was superior to us because it was collective. It was very convoluted. I today would hold that there was some insight there in that so many people put so much collective thought into a prescribed arena, and then they behave based on that we see manifest in our world. The delusion or myth, or whatever you want to call it, actually has become physically manifest through these people's deluded or delusional behavior. And I really do keep coming back to delusion, even if I don't want to necessarily assign
judgment.
Yeah, no judgment, and I don't want it to sound as if I was degrading someone or saying that they're less well or less healthy or less than me psychically or mentally or psychologically, psychiatrically, in any way, shape, or form. I simply recognize that while there may not be recognition of it, I've been watching a lot of Darren Brown recently, and the mass hypnosis effect, the hypnotic effect that he reveals regarding the spiritual phenomenon, etc., makes a lot of sense. It fits into a lot of the psychological understandings that I have, that the brain is predisposed for, I think I mentioned when we were in Facebook chat, apathenia, paranoia, those kinds of phenomena that we mistake randomness. We see patterns because we are programmed to recognize, for example, faces.
Yeah.
That's wired into our biology. As a result, when we see something that resembles a face, we see a face because we're looking for faces. That's part of our species' ability to connect with other members of our species and survive as a social species. As a social species, we have communication and interaction and shared cognitive experience through these communication channels as they've evolved. Language is a very finicky one, but we have yet managed to evolve patterns that we might say are not natural. They're artificial, they're created by man, they're synthetic. And I hesitate. I recognize the distinction, just like I recognize the mountain is a mountain, if there's a river. But to parallel that parable as unparalleled, all of human affairs are natural.
Yeah. I agree. Well, I have a thing where people misunderstood where I said that I see religion and supernatural as natural. What I meant was not that religion is somehow, telling what's natural. It's just that it's a natural thing. They keep trying to say it's something else. No, it's just made up stuff. The things you think are supernatural are just natural events. You're wrongly interpreting.
And the social, psychological, evolutionary hypotheses that have been presented regarding how religion has developed, not only through the historical evidence and anthropological evidence, but in terms, this is where I would say inductive reasoning, because we don't necessarily have strong physical evidence at this time to show how early natural selection favored those who made these errors in favor of it really was that bad thing. Tiger. Wind in the reeds sounds like tiger. It must be tiger. Run away. Saved you, even if 9 out of 10 times it was the wind, as opposed to the one who made the error, or actually could discern between the tiger and the wind most of the time, but one time makes an error and it's a tiger that it may take some time for that selection to take place. But eventually, people being a little bit superstitious and a little bit jumpy by their nature, and then creating something to make them feel that they had power over their environment so that they could calm the fear. And then having that develop into social organizations that understood this information and then could develop on it and perhaps understand a bit more in their animism and then become agricultural and now start trying to track cycles of nature a little bit, and they're encoding it. And so this is science 1.0, if you will. And then science 1.0 becomes the basis for social organization, morals and values being encoded like laws we do today, and that's government 1.0.
Yeah.
And when you combine these things, you've got religion 1.0. Now,
yeah, well, I do address this in my book that's going to be coming out, The Tree of Lies and Its Hidden Roots, Exposing the Evolution of Religion and Removing the Rationale of Faith. And I start archaeologically religion at 100,000 years ago, and then I give archaeological data and facts, like you talked about induction, the evidence, the actual archaeological evidence, what they found, and when they found it, and give some of the meaning of what it kind of means of what they found. And all the way up to current religion. So I do think that a lot of people don't know some of the evidence that's out there. Like in my chapter 2, I have 450 references because it's just crammed with data. I bought books on archaeology. Like one of the books I have, is like almost 1,000 pages, and it cost me I think it was like $140. It's so I mean, but I have another one that was 100. So
that's a solid reference. Yes.
Well, I'm just saying that I agree with you that there is more evidence than you probably understand. It's very hard to get, and I presented it all together. So I mean, it's not like it's easy. I mean, even like I bought the Oxford Handbook of Religion. It's like 700 something pages. It cost me like $130. It doesn't distinctly, it like jumps around. It gives you some facts. I try to present mine in a timeline from here coming down, and you can see it, the evolution. You can see it changing. You can see, like you said, all these things come up and start. So like I would tell you that to me, what we consider the kind of more of an organized. Right? I actually in the book what I call it is. A domesticated religion, because I think there's a time when we domesticated animals, we started domesticating religion about 13,000 years ago, and then 5,000 years ago when we started domesticating people, which we started putting them in cities and towns, and so then like you said, politically.
I would suggest that we started domesticating religion actually a bit before, because at about 13,000 years ago, we were starting to develop agriculture.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I think that the domestication of religion, and that religion, at that point, we're talking about an oral tradition passing down wisdom through whatever mechanisms they have, storytelling, or oral lessons, whatever the system of communication was, that there was a systemization of communication in the nomadic human prior to the agricultural.
There was definitely religion. Before I said, religion to me goes back 100,000 years. But what I mean by domesticated is we started making structures. We started having distinct figurines that related to the beliefs. We started, because I mean,
and I'm suggesting that these were existing prior to the agricultural.
oh, absolutely, 70,000 years ago, right? 70,000 years ago so 70,000 years ago in South Africa, there's worship of a stone serpent or snake that they did for a few hundred years. So I mean, I agree with you. Definitely, there was religion.
And snake motif tends to be related to the cycle of time quite often. The changing of airs, the shedding of skin, the migrations.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of symbols that are associated, but it's usually associated with cycles and progressions of time. The recognition of time cycles and the fact that they were associated with astronomical bodies.
Yeah.
They didn't understand they were astronomical bodies. They were lights in the skies, but there were movements and there were patterns of them. And that they began to understand these cycles of nature was what allowed them to, I feel like they domesticated the knowledge before they actually applied it in the domestication in terms of building structures larger than portable talisman kind of structure. They were weaving. The patterns in their weavings could have.
Oh yeah, well there, right there. Well, there's also very, like you said, art pottery was very. I think it's, but the only thing it's about induction though. We have to use too much deduction because the pottery definitely has symbolism and check marks. I mean, like the swastika probably goes back 20,000 years ago, but was it at that point? Was it religious? Was it not? Could be.
My emphasis, though, would be that we don't at any distraction of the same sort that people have with the nature of abiogenesis or the nature of the initial presentation of the universe as it became the Big Bang, from whatever, if there was singularity, if it's not a if it does actually reduce to a singularity rather than a funnel of infinite dimension, or multiverse, But if it does resolve our universe to a singularity and a beginning, we don't say it poofed into existence out of nothing.
No.
I don't want to suggest any idea that the domestication of religion was some kind of sudden thing. It was
Oh no, I know. Well, if you read the book, there's no sudden thing. Well, because I say that people started sacredizing, I think, things probably before they were even humans. I mean, animals will worship fire or sometimes rain dance with water. I mean, so birds will actually do sacredizing behaviors. So I don't put. I agree with you. I don't think it's just humans, and in any way, shape, or form, animals.
You really just hit the nail on the head for me. And I don't know if Aboriginal American tribal people did this, and that's where people traveling the Western Trail learned this. But it suddenly dawned on me that a lot of the original Western pioneers and so forth are noted for having planted chilies all along the route.
I didn't hear you said planted what?
Planted chili.
Oh, chili.
They planted chilies.
Oh, okay.
Yes, chili pepper.
Oh, yeah, okay.
As a significant staple good for them to be able to harvest, or others to harvest along the trail, and that this would have been how agriculture probably even began in the first place, migrating tribes just saying, okay, we plant the seeds, or following the seeds that they left at their last campsites where they defecated, perhaps even learning about how this happened, seeing their own seeds, and realizing somewhere along the way, somebody putting those two pieces together. Again, do some kind of creative induction, and then play around to find out if it worked. That's the deductive part. That's the empirical work, if you will. What a joy empiricism is.
Oh yeah, I
mean,
I like empiricism. I
feel so strongly for those people who might have been reaching so hard for all of these concepts for so long over the millennia, and had not the empirical means that we have at our disposal today.
Oh, true.
To explore these things, find out the truth, find out the reality. I mean, as much as I can be at times looking around in the world, go, look at this, look at the human condition. I can also just sometimes just revel in the fact that we have come so far, and that we are not even finished. We're just hardly beginning. And this is something that I think we've chatted briefly about it on Facebook. The idea that the anthropocentric model for values.
Sorry, can you please explain that? I know what that is. Can you say for other people? I don't like using terms that are too hard and people don't know.
Right. The anthropocentric or human-centered
Right.
perspective on value or goodness, which is very typical in religion, but extends to a lot of secular philosophy as well.
Yes.
May be an error. I mentioned, or as you mentioned in the promo picture for this, that I'm a transhumanist.
Right.
I'm also, I identify as transgender, I identify as lesbian, I present kind of genderqueer. Sometimes I'm a little mixed. I like to dress femininely. I'm kind of lazy about the makeup or the shaving. And sometimes, I like to present masculine. But I feel mostly feminine inside, and when I'm doing the masculine role, it's always felt like a role for me. So all the world's a stage became kind of like a motto for me for a long time. But that's the rest of the details about me. So backing up transhumanism that I came to. Humanism, most people probably know about it. It's about basically just kind of not being an asshole, being good to one another, and enjoying a philosophy of consensus that benefits the most while doing the least harm to the fewest. Does the greatest good for the greatest number while doing the least harm to the least number. Humanism is not that complex.
Right.
Transhumanism adds a little spin to it. It says that, not just us, though, it's also things that are around us. We might not be the final form of life. We might not be the final sentient form that gets off this planet. There was an interesting science fiction novel that I read something about an alien race employs another alien race to time travel back to come and destroy us or just not destroy us, we destroy all our dogs because our dogs become sentient and go and destroy them. And when we learn that this alien race that's indiscriminately destroying us along with our dogs is trying to do that, we sequester a whole bunch of our dogs in deep caves and deep tunnels and stuff that they can't be reached, and we stay down there with them, and when the rest of the earth has been obliterated and all the dogs are gone and the aliens leave, we come back and we start raising our dogs, and we start breeding them for intelligence, and they do become the dominant species, and they do pervade throughout the galaxy, and so human life on Earth facilitates.
Yeah.
It will expand, So, that's way out fiction. On the other hand,
Interesting, though.
We're making significant advances in nanotechnology, nanobiology, genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence. All of these things combine into a milieu that suggests that there may be some kind of life that we are evolving towards that may include mechanical and may have some facsimile of the emotive experience we have today, or may not, or may not have that much mechanical. The idea of the whole robot generation and so forth. That's kind of stuff terminated. Matrix. That might not be happening. What might be happening is some kind of further genetic evolution of the human. Without that much control over our genetic composition. Maybe we want to add things. Maybe when we want to be able to manipulate it for different planetary environments if we get off-world. Maybe we want to manipulate it while we're still here on Earth.
Yeah, I think we're going to do that first.
and if we can do it with nanotechnology, with less invasive procedures, and in a way that doesn't harm us, can we have a law?
Yeah, but
so that we can do it.
I think the pushback is going to be seriously hard. We can't even get people to be okay with genetically altering our vegetables. I mean, people are like up in arms about this.
I understand what you're saying.
I mean, I think it should happen, but I'm just saying, man.
I don't disagree. And I don't disagree. I also, though, say that what we're looking at is this little narrow time span.
Right.
We just a moment spoke about this time span of humanity that what we're looking at is
right.
This, you know? And
Right.
If we look even back here and other branches, it's like, 65 million years ago, the dominant species that might have become sentient, one impact event, bye-bye. And little shrews managed to become us.
Right.
There's going to be billions of years of Earth potential life if we don't destroy it. And even if we upset the balance as it's known, life will probably adapt somewhere, somehow, some way.
I agree.
It may include us.
May not.
But in 65 million years, in 1 million years, in 100,000 years, look at what has happened to the human species. In 100,000 years, will the dominant species on Earth, if it's our descendant, recognize us as the same species as them? We don't recognize that 100,000-year-old ancestor as our thing. And that's my point of the humanist anthropocentric view. Perhaps not the most valid view, unless it's caveated as short-term, narrow, and within this scope of time, and recognize that it may need to be sacrificed for a greater, bigger picture, a greater good for a greater number, because it may be holding us back to be too humanocentric.
Well, first off, axiology is intrinsic, extrinsic, and systemic. So it's not focused on only the here and now. It always is thinking about the how things relate to the future. Just like when I tell people, the difference I see as an axiologist is between punching someone and raping someone, where you might have the physical pain at the moment be the same, the psychological pain, the systemic problem that it causes. The rape is probably going to cause more life, damaging and long-term effects than just punching someone. So axiologically, you can approach the issue differently. Like you were talking about, you had abuse in your life and sexual abuse. The reason people don't just use the word abuse and actually say sexual abuse is because it has a different impact on a person. Abuse does have an impact, and then sexual abuse has another kind of an impact.
It's interesting, yes, the sexual abuse, because of this psychological abuse that was engaged to at the same time. Without getting into the entire details of the events, definitely created a different thing from the physical abuse that I experienced, which was more often and more consistent,
Right.
and perhaps may have been the reason that the sexual abuse was never addressed, because I couldn't get there. I couldn't get there to tell anybody about it because I was so terrorized
Right.
by the physical.
Well, I'm sorry that happened to you. I really wish no child was abused, and so.
I'm not sorry that that happened to me today, because I am here today, and so the I, me that is here now, had to have that happen to be me here now today. It's not that I would wish that to happen again. In fact, I wish to be able to share more about it, such that people understand how much damage it did to me, how much we need to avoid doing it anymore to anyone else, and that the topic actually is broached more often, more publicly, so that solutions at earlier intervention points can be engaged rapidly, symptoms can be recognized more readily, and we can gradually heal from the trauma of evolving into who we are on this planet. I mean, it's the collective trauma of that I see continuing through all of our systems. And one of the things that I suggest is that nationalism is just religion 2.0. That as long as we have this nationalist thing, and we don't necessarily have the figurehead of a sky daddy, but we have a rotating big brother, if you will, and we have this faithful this fidelity, faith, and pride in our fidelity for our system, however flawed and contradictory it may be, rather than a rational standpoint of this is what we're working with, this is where I am, and this is what we're working with to change to maybe something greater. But again, as long as we're...
Well, yeah, I'm no fan of nationalism at all. I mean, I don't know if you know, but I'm a socialist anarchist or a mutualist. So I have no, and I don't like worshiping figureheads of any kind, whether they're, political ones or otherwise. I mean,
I sometimes, the social anarchist label carries sometimes so much stigma in our world. And it's weird because the other label that I found that's almost spot on, if it's coming at a different angle, it still seems to meet at the same place, is this geo-libertarian idea of the preservation of the liberty of mind with the common sharing of all of the natural resource that we encounter, because as long as there's competition amongst scarce resources, there will be this I hate to admit how often I will reference religious scriptures, but there's a great deal of wisdom. There's a whole bunch of holes in that oyster, but even if it is mostly muck. One of them is this fable of Cain and Abel, and the idea that there's a competition for even something as simple as the favoritism of a father.
Yeah.
Doesn't even have to be something material. That we could be induced to kill our own sibling. And unless there's plenty for all, there's always going to be some...
Right, but to me, when you say geo-libertarianism, That to me, that is social anarchism, because I would call it green anarchism, or geo anarchism. I see this just like, to me, I would consider myself a left libertarian. It's just the difference with people. Most people in America say they're libertarian when they don't classify it. They're a right libertarian to me. They're conservative.
I'm a coffee drinking libertarian. Leave it with that.
Yeah.
Because I don't really want to bash anybody right now. I mean, I don't think the point of our
well, no, I wasn't bad. I was just classifying. I wasn't bashing them.
But I know you were. I'm suggesting that I might.
Oh.
Other than that illusion that I made, I don't want to go any further there because I'm tempted. There are a lot of things that frustrate me deeply in this world, and this is about the only reason that I actually will wear a badge, but declare myself and say, yes, I'm throwing the atheist community. Mm-hmm. Even though I don't feel like being atheist, I don't really want to care about this shit at all.
Yeah.
But the fact is that we have to overcome our mere evolution. This is one of the principles that Richard Dawkins presents, is that, yeah, we've evolved to this point. Okay, great. And now we have the cognitive faculties as an artifact of our evolution, not necessarily as the reason for propelling drive.
Right.
You know, the propelling drive that kept us, there's a Stephen King quote from the novel The Cell that talks about this core prime directive that we have, and that the reason we became the dominant species on the planet wasn't because we were the smartest or the fastest or the most adaptive. It's because we were the meanest, most murderous motherfuckers in the jungle. Only way we survived. And because there were other apes that we were competing against, and, some of them didn't. There were other similar hominids that we were competing against. And I carry some 2-3% Neanderthal.
All right.
Those ancestors ain't around. So there's not much more reason to think Homo sapiens resentence won't be the final product. Okay, so I've gone way off tangent because I did feel a whole bunch of strong feelings about those abuse issues. And the abuse issues, then I hit on another thing that I feel strongly about. I don't want to say I'm an atheist. I want that to all be done and over with.
Oh, I agree with you. I don't want to either. That's like people understand, why do I classify my sexuality? Why do I classify my gender? Why do I classify how I present myself? I shouldn't really have to. But unfortunately, right. I heard people say, well, labels just hurt us. Well, I don't want to have to do that. I'd rather just be myself. But I do that because we have to confront the fact that people say there's only two genders, there's only one acceptable sexuality. I mean, we have to fight back. We have to fight back against the fact that the world assumes God. For me.
And here's two things for me that the sexual abuse, the first time, happened at the hands of a cleric who happened to be a Baptist pastor. It was during vacation Bible school. And I was threatened with the wrath of God for having tempted him in the first place, because I'd been such a pretty little boy that he couldn't tell that I was a boy, not a girl, which I actually at the time thought was a compliment, even though I was being condemned as a sinful temptress. And if I ever told anyone that the sin and the condemnation and the punishment from God would be worse, so I go home and I'm saying I don't want to go back to that. And when I meet his mom, who is an active alcoholic, telling me to shut up because this is her babysitter. She is a single mom, but she has a boyfriend who she tells to take me downstairs and set me straight. And he trying to get me to stop acting like a little girl. Oh, wait a minute. That wasn't the first time I had been told that. So we find in my personal therapy, I've uncovered that this gender dysphoria existed at a very early age. We're not sure that it can come out of the gender dysphoria, some kind of a.
So I know. Please, once again, you said a word that I know no one else. I do understand what that word means. Could you please explain?
Gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is the feeling that I'm asking to play a role different from who I am. Specifically, gender dysphoria. Actually, dysphoria is feeling uncomfortable, feeling perhaps bad. But it has to do, in a particular case, being asked to play a gender role that doesn't coincide with how I feel about who I am. Asking to present myself in a way different from who I feel that I am. And being told that I must, and I have to, and this is my only option. And then, when I'm not doing it well enough, then I happen to have this sexual abuse and this physical abuse that gets me to try and suppress it and hold it down that much more, and hate that much more. And at one point, some 18 years ago, I came out after doing a theatrical production in which I had to play as bit parts, sometimes 3 main characters. I played a guy and 2 female roles in the same play called Sylvia. And I come to the therapist afterwards and say, hey, I felt so free. I need to explore this. No, you don't. That's just, you're just getting lost.
Your counselor said that?
Yeah. My therapist.
Your therapist said that?
He was a psychiatrist, no less.
Wow, that's fucking disgusting.
And I've only come out again, and I ended up, interestingly enough, relapsing into alcoholism for 3 years. I'm just over 9 years sober now. 2 years ago, in ongoing therapy, we've resolved much of the childhood PTSD issues, uncovered them. I still experience anxiety, sadness. It triggers depression and anger. And I try to temper that. I'm dealing with the atheist issue in particular. And again, I don't want to be angry as a playing the victim card. I want to say this was my experience. Mm-hmm. And it did not do well for my health. The wind here.
I was say, wow, it turned white.
I have a curtain that's wafting back over the screen. Let's see if I can trap it so it doesn't do that anymore. Yeah, so I don't want to be perpetrating the same aggressive tone that came at me from the religion or from the gender binary discipline. I want to share my experience, and the good-evil paradigm is something that I have a lot of difficulty with. I think it's a legacy holdover from Human System Theory 1.0, aka religion. Good versus evil paradigm, that's another binary. I do like the idea of health, and health being somewhat subjective, varied, and scalar. Not binary. And mental health being a significant part of health. And so I would like to share my story in a context of how these things affected my well-being, if you will, rather than from this was bad, this was wrong, this was evil. I feel strongly enough that I could engage in that idea a lot, with Pastor. It's just plain evil. But no, he was damaged goods.
Mm-hmm.
He was not well. I don't think that when I engage in some of the belief that I engaged in, that I was talking about earlier, that there may be something, there must be something. I don't think that that was done in sound mental health. I don't think beliefs like that are decisions made in soundness of mind, from my own personal experience. In my last round of recovery, for the first 8 years, I attended meetings again. In the first round of recovery, I attended meetings and someone introduced me to the Bible and said, well, I'd read the Bible, of course. I'd read it when I was a child, and I found that definition of omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence everywhere. All the power, all the knowledge. The one thing I always get. Not necessarily relevant, because it's everything.
Right.
You, me, the rocks, the air, the absence. Someone introduced me to this Bible in recovery, and so I didn't need this big book to see it really. The big book actually derived, that big book being the text Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the central tome of that, what the government calls a pseudo-religion, but is quite ritual in its,
Oh, it is very
in its
ritual.
nature. Anyone who's really interested in learning about the truth of AA ought to investigate a website called theorangekeepers.com.
The orange what?
Wonderful. Orangekeepers.com.
Keepers?
Papers.
Oh, papers.
In,
Okay.
Right. As in lead in a book.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that it's understood exactly what you're saying.
Yes, Orange Keepers.
Okay.
And I believe it's .com, might be a .org. Anyway, it exposes a lot of things about the false doctrines within 12-step programs. This is not to say that there isn't some kind of a baby in that bathwater. There are secular recovery groups that use many of the same principles that started there and came out of spiritualism. This is again saying there are some gems of philosophy and gems of astronomy that were laced into these dogma. That's why they needed to be recorded in the first place, because there was some wisdom that they were trying to transmit, albeit through weird rituals and crazy things that perhaps made it more emotional and more dramatic and therefore easier to remember. And the more crazy it got, the more crazy it had to be. Because, like, look at our generation being desensitized. Anyway, I lost track of what I was starting there. Something to do with...
We're talking about the secular programs that came out of AA or whatever.
Something, there's rational recovery, and for people who feel like all they need to do is get their own head straight, they can pretty much do it on their own. There is smart recovery, which is perhaps on the other end of the spectrum, where there is a greater emphasis on group work and social interaction, although one can still study alone and learn how to remain in a healthy relationship with or without substance, but without going into the dependence and abuse or no. Some of them suggest abstinence is the only path, others suggest that moderation can be achieved. Personally, I'm going with abstinence now. I tried moderation and I wasn't very good at it. Who knows, maybe I might try it again some year. Not this one. This is working for me. I also developed a seed that an alcohol really is kind of contraindicated for that reason. things alone. I started with the idea that I really didn't want to do this atheism thing, but I have an emotional reason. I try to keep the emotional reason attached. However, I see it all over in politics, in indoctrination of the children, with false ideas that block them from absorbing consensual proofs that we have established through more empirical methods and rational deductive methods and empirical methods. Not just pure utilitarian pragmatism, although that has to be engaged. It doesn't have to be engaged through mind control, through hypnosis, through mental slavery.
Yeah.
And through mental slavery, which then facilitates economic, self-supporting slaves, where there doesn't even have to be a title anymore, they just enact policy. I sound almost conspiracy theorist here, but I'm not suggesting a conspiracy. I'm suggesting an open phenomenon that if one examines the structure.
I don't think it's a conspiracy. They say they want to.
It's a simple hierarchy.
Yeah.
And there, at the upper levels of this oligarchical structure, there's dispute, and there's gain, and there's positioning, and there's fighting, and there's power struggles, and I don't want to suggest that we're pawns, because I don't think any of us are even individually counted as pieces. It's all aggregate statistics. And so I can't be too concerned about that. I know a lot of people who are fighting strongly in those arenas, and I recognize the importance of the idea that the other 98% to get people mobilized. And yet I happen to embrace, I stumbled upon this philosophy that's also the name of my current operating system on my computer, Ubuntu. And the philosophy is really pretty simple. It's summed up in the idea that how can any one of us be truly happy if any one of us is not? Because if any one of us is not, then there has to be in the back of our minds either an empathic concern that we want the other person to be really happy, or if we're completely sociopathic, then there has to be an intellectual concern, because if that person's not happy, they might be looking to get a piece of my share. And everybody else is leaving my share alone because they're truly happy. But I got to worry about that one who's not truly. Even the sociopath has to be concerned. That's in there, and I know that's totally idealistic.
Well, I have this. I think that it does matter that as axiology, I see humans as valuable, like you already know, and I think that we do need to have concern. I mean, that everyone's life matters, and for my fact that same thing what you're saying, that it's hard for me to have my good life while other people are suffering. I mean, the whole does affect us. We are individual parts, but we're like, to me, I see it like an ecosystem. You start messing with one part of the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem starts to be affected when there's a massive imbalance. And so I try to do my best that I can to try to bring things in balance. Like you said, of course, it's always going to be idealistic that we in the individual can't do everything. But I don't think that we have to do everything. I think that's also an intellectual flaw, that somehow we're required to. Because I see us also as we're like a pebble. You drop a pebble in the water, well, the water then ripples around it, and it sends those ripples outward. So if I don't think that we have to only affect the part we hit the water. And I think that you're doing something right now, speaking out. I think that you're doing something right now, being who you are. I see the person as political. The fact that you are who you are openly, I think you're already, being, someone that can be, look up to, someone that's giving a message, that's making a difference. So I don't.
I want to respond to one phrase there immediately, and I know that this is something that we'll naturally do. We look for role models, and we look up to people. And I hate the idea of someone looking up to me. I don't like the idea of any kind of pedestal. I think of myself as having certain attributes, certain experiences that may make me valuable, and I like the idea that people like me and relate to me, and I want them to recognize that whatever they like about me and relate to me is them seeing something about themselves that they wouldn't be able to identify these likable attributes if they didn't have something about that to themselves, and that I'm not any better nor worse than them. I may be better at something, but there's probably something they're better at. And so to mutually admire one another is something I think is a wonderful. I sound almost kind of a hippie here, but
well, yeah, I don't believe in hierarchy. So I mean, I know some people look up to me, but I see what I am is just being authentic and then inspiring people. So, what's that?
I don't mind being a team leader.
Yeah.
I don't mind being a. Here's something you would understand strongly in rotation of leadership.
Yeah.
Because I believe that leadership is not only something that comes naturally, but is something that can be developed in anyone, and that everyone should have a chance. And if they need more support in their leadership, great. And we all become closer and tighter as a team under the person who needs the greatest support to be a leader. To support this person and help them find their leadership quality. So that they can express their voice better. One of the other things that I really like, that I have to admit, there are gems in these places. I don't like 12-step groups because that was my last experience in woo-woo. They have to have an open mind. And I said, okay, I'll cop to higher power, reality, not just reality, little r, my reality, your reality, our reality, but with a big capital R. I'll give it the big capital R, reality. None of us really know what it is, so it's bigger than all of us. It's a higher power. Yeah. But it has to be a loving higher power. Well, love's in there. What the heck, there's also a whole bunch of recklessness and randomness, but love's in there. That's part of the randomness. Okay. They didn't like that too much either. And then, it's God. I'm like, well, higher power. Well, we mean higher power when we say God, but you're saying God. I'm sick of it. And half of them are going off to church afterwards and inviting me to church and keep inviting me to church. And, oh, well, you'll come around eventually. And that kind of... what I'm looking for, what the meaning, looking down upon me, that kind of thing.
They're calling you stupid when they're the ones believing in fantasy.
It's a passive aggressive way of
condemning you.
Yeah, I'll pray. It's the same thing as I'll pray for you. I feel pity. It's a pity. It's not an empathy. It's not a sympathy.
No.
It's a pity.
Or it's a threat.
And it's demeaning. Yeah, or it's a threat.
Because when I tell people that I'm an atheist and I don't believe, and they tell me I'll pray for you, I said, that you save your prayer. I see that as a threat. If you really care, you would know that you should be praying for, I don't know, suffering children that are being abused. You should be praying for starving children. You know, you should be praying for people that are suffering in Africa or India or in China. Or you should. I am the last person, if you really had a caring heart, you should be praying for. I'm doing fine.
So yeah. So anyway, I couldn't quite abide by the whole prayer thing. It was at the beginning and at the end of every meeting. The ritual chanting, the language which becomes limiting and narrowing and self-hypnotic. There was value to some of the techniques, and I could extract some value from having had the experience. So I'm not going to say that programs are evil. And I'm not going to say that the people who run them or participate in them are evil. But I would suggest that they're very old technology, and that the people who are engaged in it are rather misguided. I'm going to try to fix this quickly. Find the flow through here. Let's see if I have something to... There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you. So yeah,
So what are your goals? So you said you're now getting involved in atheism. Do you have any goals on what you're trying to do with your atheism, or what? Do you have any goals you would like to do?
yeah, I started on this path about a year ago with a personal belief that Freud was on the right track, that religion was, in fact, a delusion. That religion...
Didn't he say it was a mental illness? I think.
Yes, and I believe he classified it as delusional. A derailment of... derailment of delusion, no, derailment...
That's fine. Go ahead.
Anyway, and I was getting some interesting information about that, and the idea that religion may be associated with delusion, and that religion may exacerbate delusional states, and that delusion may incur religion. But there's this in at least clinical psychology today that does not want to abandon religion nor the woo, because it doesn't feel it has enough information to, in my opinion, this is my opinion, that applied psychology, clinical psychology, counseling psychology does not really have enough clear information about how to do what they're doing without relying on whatever they can find that seems to work for some people, or even many people, sometimes. So try this positive thinking. Okay, there's some benefit to making exercises of positive thinking. Writing out a gratitude list every day. It does put one in a certain frame of mind. Okay. They're suggesting that it's because you're doing positive energy. That kind of language gets sort of mystical. And that disturbs me when I see that kind of mystical language being tossed about. I don't want to say that there are not energy fields within the human body, that we might have some kind of sensory capacity to engage with. I mean, there's more than five senses. There's sense of balance, a sense of time, sense of time short term and long term. There's a sense of direction in terms of gravitational force. These aren't simply touch, sound, taste, smell, and sight. They're not extrasensory. These are senses. Could it that there's some higher order brain function that acknowledges energetic bioelectric fields in the I don't know. It gets kind of murky in there. I like the idea that people are exploring it. I'd love for somebody to really detect something there and have something with have an experiment with that was replicable and the results could be peer-reviewed and that people could say, hey, yeah, there's something here and we can measure it and let's get on and investigate. We have it. And so we do to put much stock in that belief is about the same as putting stock in belief in issue. It's a great myth. There's some interesting moral lessons in if you take it metaphorically. But to live my life based on that kind of idea, I find myself rather isolated in Hawaii as being this. There are a lot of people who are into all kinds of different belief systems. Well, those people have a belief system.
Right. So is there atheist meetings or things? I don't know that much about Hawaii. I mean, I lived in Hawaii for 2 months as a kid, but I don't.
Big Island, they just this year started a meetup on the weekends. My living situation is such that I don't have a vehicle. I live in a very remote rural area on the lava field. Still Hawaii. I'm not going to complain.
Yeah.
But I do live in relative poverty. I am on disability. I live on less than $1,000 a month, including food stamps. And I don't have a vehicle. So it's tough. And when I want to try and get to, for example, the bus, it's 1,000 feet up the hill and 5 miles away. Just to think for a second, 1,000 feet isn't that much, except that that's at 10 feet per story, that's 100 stories. So walking 100 stories over 5 miles is a lot more than just walking 5 miles.
Oh, yeah.
And that's to catch a bus at 4:30 in the morning to get into town. And that's the bus in the morning. It's the bus from where I live to town. And there's one that comes back to evening. So, but on Sunday it doesn't run, so I don't get to that meetup. And I haven't seen any direct contact information from if somebody might be traveling.
Have you watched any of my videos of I call atheist reality TV of meetups that I go to? I have like 15 of them.
I haven't seen those, no.
Yeah, I have like about 15 of them, and I did that for the reason that I had a bunch of people on my friends list. I have about 5,000 friends all over the United States and in other countries, and a lot of them would say, "Oh, I can't get to a meetup." You know, I go to one like at least once a week, if not 2 to sometimes 3 times a week, and so I that's why I started recording myself. And you hear everybody else, you just see me, but I respond to them, and you hear them saying stuff, because I wanted to be able to do outreach for people that can't get to meetups.
I suspect that there are a lot more atheists like myself wandering around here on the Big Island, they really don't care. And because there is no real majority in Hawaii, everyone is a minority. The largest minority group in Hawaii is the Japanese at about 35%. Caucasians come in at about 26%, the next largest minority. With the Japanese comes a lot of Buddhism.
Right.
The Chinese too. There's a lot of Buddhist temples in Hawaii. There's Jehovah's Witness temples. There's Mormon temples. There's Catholic temples. Churches. There's a wide variety. The number of religious houses of worship on this island alone per capita is extraordinary in my mind. Now, maybe I'm naive. Maybe there's just as much of a density here, but it seems like there's a lot more congregations all over the island that are all different. Little various denominations of Christianity, and they're not the same. And they don't go to each other's churches, and they don't go to each other's social functions. And it's interesting in that they segregate that way, and yet they still seem to very well integrate in their everyday life because there is no real majority. Hawaii tends to be a relatively progressive state.
Yeah.
Because we have to work things out. Because nobody really has control. So we have to bargain and use the tools of consensus building such that we can't expect for everyone to agree. We can expect to have to make a little bit of compromise for someone else's point of view, which is really a better way of working than working in a strictly competitive structure. I think that's one of the greatest flaws I see with religions, politics on larger scale. Another interesting thing here is that in this county, not the state, but in this county, we are partisan free for election. In the primaries, anybody can throw their hat in if they have enough petition signatures. And the top two vote getters in the primary go on to the general election, unless somebody wins a majority in the primary, in which case they won the election.
Interesting.
It hasn't kept partisan money out of politics completely. It changed the playing field significantly. And one doesn't have to pretend to be Republican or Democrat or play one line to see who's the corporate crony puppet with the $500,000 budget for mayor,
Really?
and who's the guy running on his own $100,000 life saving, trying to stay in the race. It becomes apparent. So that brings me to another idea, change that I've seen here on the Big Island or in Hawaii, and change that I've seen over my lifetime. And I hear people go about what did these say, and I understand the vehemence and context of today, so can look back over my life and what I'm doing today. I don't think that when I was a child, I would have had, even if I'd had a whole bunch of positive influence to put forth, because the social climate hadn't progressed enough for me to feel safe coming out.
Right.
I was the first male in 2 generations and the only one in my generation in my family. So there was a lot of pressure on me being the boy. They needed me to be the boy. interesting in Hawaii here, there was a tradition of males who played the family law, and they weren't considered gay. Some of them were, some of them sexual. They just did the things that women did and tended to dress like the women did. Interestingly enough, the only reason that the tradition of hula survives to this day is because the mahu, or third gender male, kept it alive underground when the women were prevented from doing it by the Catholics. Found their way here. So, yeah, there's a kind of a, yay, I'm kind of like them who kept part of a beautiful culture alive despite religious oppression. I'm kind of like those people. And I'm not. I'm not spirit, I'm not me.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you know, like, you've asked me these labels.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. I identify with them, but that doesn't mean I am them. It's like if I say I am trans, I am lesbian, but I am me. I use the moniker Cherie. I express myself in varying ways, circumstances.
Right. Well,
I have a tendency towards these things.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked, right, the reason I asked you wasn't forcing you to take labels. I was just saying that everybody, I need them to state things so that people that read the thing understand what they're going to watch. The reason I do that, though, is so that hopefully people that feel they connect with some of that can want to watch the videos. If I just said, here's another person, and I have like 30 videos, why would they watch yours as opposed to someone else? I mean, it could be totally different. So, I'm not. The reason I classify my stuff is also somewhat the same thing. I do agree with you. I am me. I don't think, all these different labels. The reason I say is so people can know that there's not just one kind of thing. Because it'd be just very easy for me to say I'm just a man, I'm just heterosexual, but those labels aren't really correct to explain what I really am, so I agree with you. I don't think all this stuff. I just am me.
It's like it's kind of like this. Yeah, I have a left eyeball.
Yeah.
This is my eyeball. See my left eyeball? That's one aspect of me.
True.
And yes, I agree. It's very important for people who feel I'm this, and is there anybody else who's like this?
Right.
Who identifies with me, or I can identify with, so they don't feel alone.
Yes.
Because that's one of the things I was just talking earlier about, how there are some people who can do it all on their own. There are some people who need some support. I stopped going to 12-step meetings years. I haven't been to one at all for over a year. It might have been 2 years now. I miss some of the camaraderie, the hugs, the being part of that club. That's one of the things that I recognize congregation within religion facilitates. There are people who are particularly non-believing who still identify as part of a religion simply because, hey, it's where I go, it's the people who I identify with and hang out. I don't believe the same crazy stuff that they do. In fact, I don't know that they believe the same crazy stuff that I don't. But we come here because this is our safe place. This is where we know to get together. This is where we're going to be in the same language, knowing the same secret handshakes, and feeling it. And that's part of the identification banners too.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm trans.
Right.
Hey, I'm lesbian. sometimes I present more feminine, sometimes I present a little more masculine. It's easier for me to present masculine. That's just what happens. That's a lot more work for me, having, being this late in transition. I had a good, solid run of 40 years of secondary sex characteristics from testosterone coming in.
Right.
I'm always going to look kind of mannish, at least from one angle or another. My wrists, unless I'm going to have like total body contouring surgery, and I'm just not that vain.
Right.
Or that marketed to, or whatever, or not wanting to position myself in the market for that purpose that way. I recognize that there is significant advantage to positioning oneself, and one has that pedestal for that pulpit to speak a voice. I don't necessarily want that big of a following, I like being able to engage, at least engage with the audience. And if it gets too large, but then that's part of my own insecurity too. And also Tracy, early childhood influences. The Flintstones. There was this one episode where Fred Flintstone becomes a rock star overnight, and then Betty and Wilma are upset with him. So Betty's out in the audience and goes, that Fred, he's really a square. And the rumor passes through the kids that suddenly Fred dies overnight in terms of popularity. And I was reminded that, I don't know, false popularity. If my ideas were to persist after I died, wow, that would be phenomenal. I don't know about it. It would be kind of cool if I did contribute in that way. But even if I didn't, I know, like you were suggesting earlier, I'm another pebble in the pond.
Yep.
My ripples will be added or subtracted because I did participate.
Yeah. You show up.
And one of my emphases these days is, again, on that term and that paradigm of health rather than on value judgments like good or evil, although I also want to explore with you a little bit the idea of work.
Like I was trying to tell you that when in axiology, you gotta devoid yourself from religious terminology. So when they say good, they mean good as in value, as in worth. So like when you say health, I would say as an axiologist, well-being, because you could be unhealthy and sick and dying and still be at a mental state of well-being. So that you could be comfortable with who you are, whether, like, I actually have a foot that, because of a truck accident, like talking about disability, sometimes I can't walk. I actually have a wheelchair.
Right.
And sometimes I have to be in a wheelchair, and I actually cannot, even walk to the bathroom. And, but I still feel whole as a person. I still feel valuable, even though my body is not full. Is not functioning properly. I'm not, so my health is not great at that point, but my well-being is fine. I don't have mental, my well-being.
I would see well-being as an aspect, a dimension of, I should say, I would see mental well-being as you're describing as different from health. I would employ the term well-being instead of health, and say that mental well-being and physical well-being were components of overall total well-being of the organism human. Because the mental state has so much power and effect over the physical state. The placebo effect alone, through external stimulation or through self-hypnosis or through just concentrated focus called meditation, much the same as self-hypnosis in truth. But the idea that there can be some kind of phenomenon of the mind, which I do not distinguish from the brain. I simply say it is an emergent property of the brain. It can have such significant effect on the body, and at the same time, functioning of the brain is not separate from the body or above the body. If the body is significantly injured or insulted, the brain will have resources drawn away from it, from its potential capacity.
Right. All I'm saying is, you know, I'm a rationalist, so I'm always going to probably be more prone towards the mind. I agree. The mind is a product of the body. I agree, but I'm just saying your mental state doesn't have to relate to the body. Just like you talk about transhumanism, could you upload your mind and still exist? A lot of transhumanists would say yes, because they don't see the body as a requirement of the capacity to mind. And I'm just saying, like, is Stephen Hawking's body is now, you know, to where it's basically almost not functioning, and yet the person is still at a level of high functioning. That's what I mean by saying is, I know what you're saying. I agree. If the body could be in well-being and the mind in well-being.
Right, now you just introduced a different term, which might be a subset of the term well-being, a different term, functionality.
Uh-huh.
That functionality is an aspect of well-being.
Yeah.
Functionality, both mind and body.
Right.
Now, the thing that I'm real strong about, though, is that there has been this mind-brain dichotomy for so long, and I really feel that there's a false dichotomy there, and that it is a hangover of spirits.
Yeah, well, I don't believe in spirits. I don't believe in ghosts. Yeah, I don't believe in dualism.
It's right. It's the Descartes compromise of dualism, exactly.
Yeah.
And I find that dualistic, I think, therefore I am. No. I am, therefore I can think.
Right.
I am in this state, therefore I can think. Although there is also the concept of ego, the idea that so I think, therefore I, however the proper verb after that is, I think, therefore I is. Ego is, not I am. If we didn't think, that's the whole ego emerging from higher mind.
Well, right. So I'm a rationalist, a modern rationalist, not the old rationalists of Plato's time or something, where they see themselves separate from or above empiricism. I see empiricism and rationalism now as a unit of the same thing, not a separate entity. Like, to me, it's not me against, rationalism against empiricism. It's a rationalist should be based in empiricism and thus draw more rational conclusions from empiricism. So, I mean...
Right. Now, the idea that you suggested about mind being something that could be uploaded to or transferred to a different architecture.
Uh-huh.
But to me, it says that mind is an emergent phenomenon. The fact that we can take this emergent phenomenon and replicate it, because we're not really transferring, we're not taking it out of one vessel and putting it into another. What we're doing is we're replicating it in another vessel.
I agree.
Now, replicating it in another vessel doesn't mean that mind is a unique and separate phenomenon. It just now has a different architecture under which it's,
No, I'm not disagreeing. I don't think of mind as a separate thing. I was just making a comment that the capacity to mind. So I was talking about well-being.
Right. It is relevant because a transhumanist point of view would suggest that the architecture in which that mind was contained would necessarily influence and affect the nature of how that mind behaves.
I agree. I think it does. I mean,
it would process more rapidly. It would have completely different set of sensory inputs and data inputs.
Right. Well, it's like you said, you and me. If I would have been born a more intersex, that could definitely affect me. If I would have been born trans, that would have definitely. If I would have been born, a standard, a male, that would be different. If I was born a female, that would definitely the same mind. It certainly would have affected my experience. And then, the experience also of the culture, of the society, of the family. I mean, everything makes a difference.
Now, I also want to get into a little bit of my favorite form of inductive reasoning, which I call science fiction. It yields fiction. Now, I will state straightforward that it does not yield actual results. It's imagination. It's taking what we have today, in the best sense, and being somewhat of a futurist, or at least taking abstracts of what's available today and putting a small twist on what could happen and exploring potential developments that could come out of it. It doesn't predict everything, although sometimes we find it does shape ideas and does point us in a general direction or give us some insights as to how we might modify or shape ourselves. And anybody who thinks that humans are not genetically modified organisms in and of ourselves is mistaken about the nature of the slow process of genetic modification that humans have performed on ourselves in terms of breeding throughout our evolution. We have consciously modified what might have otherwise been simply a passive natural phenomenon. Not to suggest that our conscious modification is anything other than natural also. It gets confusing to a lot of people, though, when we start distinguishing in those natural phenomena. And I understand how it can be. And this is why whenever I do make distinctions, like mind and brain, I want to make sure that people understand that there isn't a dichotomy. There is a direct connection. Brain is not separate from body. Brain is organ within the body.
I agree.
It just happens to have phenomenological properties. One of those properties is that collectively electromagnetic and chemical behaviors perceive and conceive, and as a result, cognition takes place. We don't know the details. It's okay. We know that that's what's happening. It's kind of like, I see a ship on the horizon. I can't tell you about it, but I do know that that's a ship.
Yeah, I agree. Well, it's been. I need to wrap it up because it's almost at the time. But so, is there anything else that you wanted to address specifically, or any question you wanted to ask me specifically in the next 5 minutes? Or
yeah, I want to get back to this idea of worth and value and how we measure it, because I did mention that I feel that the humanocentric position may be off base. One of the science fiction ideas that I was trying to tie in here, that is another transhumanist idea, is the one that was presented in the film last year that I found very enchanting, Lucy, where in this story is exposed to some huge amounts of horrible experimental drug that gives her transcendent abilities, and eventually her mind architecture such that her body dissipates, that she uses so much of her brain capacity that she can manipulate things and stuff like that.
So I can already address what probably you're going to ask, but because I do want to wrap it up. So, okay, axiological or formal axiology, I said, is an argument, especially towards atheism, as axiological atheist, is an argument from or a type of anthropocentric argument. Now, I'm not saying that it is limited to that. That's just the easiest way, just like using terms. So you go to lesbian or trans, you're classifying terms. In other words, what it does is it basically says that the only thing that has always has intrinsic value is human. Now, I would say that it doesn't do this on the point of that it has to be human. It's the human qualities or characteristics. In other words, if you could take an ape and then make them advanced, then they would be added to our thing. What it basically means is that humans have the experiential, emotional impact, and the understanding and the impact of systematic and systemic time. And like I said, an animal is emotionally fear in the moment. Where a human, I could terrify you by saying a year from now I'm going to kill you. Or I could not even kill you. I'm going to say I'm going to kill the child that's not been born that you're going to have. You know, I can. There's impacts on that level of intelligence that makes the how you should treat that person differently. So it really. So but okay, so you could. In other words. Well, I'm just trying to say so fast. So you, in other words, as a formal axiologist, I would say that all certain levels of sentient beings that have an ability to understand time differential and understand and have emotional impact to experience would be put at a higher status. So levels. So and everything. Okay. So then it classifies, then go down to what feels pain. Everything with beingness would be next, and then plants would have a value but have lower than but above dirt, because it's something alive. Then dirt would still have something above ideas because ideas themselves have no intrinsic value. What they don't even have extrinsic value. What they have is systemic. In other words, what they produce. An idea will produce something because of how it affects the other organisms. It itself is not alive. It has no dignity, no right to exist. You're
saying a sapiocentric point of view, not necessarily anthropocentric, but a sapiocentric point of view. However, pragmatically, the only evidence that we have of anything that resembles that is human.
Correct. So, that is correct. Yes. So, I agree. Right. Yeah. So I use some terms because it's just easier to explain. When you really talk about formal axiology, it's very complicated. But so I try to use easier terms. Like really, a true axiologist wouldn't even use the word good because to them that has they would just use value. But the problem is when you say value, people think values, and that's not the same thing they're talking about.
They would say value with a magnitude, and they would say greater or lesser.
Correct. Correct. So
from zero, which was the absence of anything.
Correct. Or the minus of.
No value.
Right. Well, some things actually remove. Right. Some things remove value.
Up to everything.
Right.
Totality, if you were, as we were expressing that.
Right. Yes.
Thing,
yeah.
Holds 100% value.
Correct. Like I said, and also things have minus value. In other words, things remove value. Things can actually harm, or like you talked about, the hurt of well-being would be something that is disvalue, but that gets confusing for people to understand what disvalue is, and like you said, from 1 to 100 of disvalue. That there's things that are completely disvalued that actually remove all that. But anyways, like I said, some of this stuff is so complicated. It's a very hard philosophy. They use calculus, and I mean it's very good, but it's very scientific. But it's I want to make it real world so people can start benefiting from thinking with value, from understanding how to care. And a lot of people are doing somewhat of the stuff anyways, but I'm trying to make it more usable. So I'm limited, like you said, to probably improper, in a sense, terms. Just like when I tell most people, because it's easier for them, I just tell them I'm heterosexual, when actually gynosexual would probably be a better term. But then they go, what does that mean? Or so so the point is, like I could.
Yeah, I guess there is one. That's one thought I wanted to close with, and it's about the idea that never mind.
Well, that's fine. So
the thing that I'm really interested in is the progressive movement of civilization, and seeing it would be I would be very happy to see us progress beyond the ignorance and hypnotism which was today. That was the point. Is that I started out on this journey of declaring myself atheist,
right,
wanting to discover the psychological theory behind this delusional phenomenon. And what I have discovered is that it is as much a natural disposition as it is a hypnotic effect and a certain amount of the natural human condition corruption, where people have noticed that they can use it to control others.
I totally agree.
Personal benefit.
I totally
agree. And not for the institution of religion, rather than just the rituals and sharing that was originally intended of it. Somebody realized they could take advantage of these structures, and they built new states based on religions. Since states may have started to shed religions, they still have retained rituals and certain aspects to control the population.
Nationalism is, like you said,
we're cattle.
Yeah.
And that is the thing that disturbs me most. I know that I am chattel.
Yeah.
But I am also conscious, sentient chattel. I am not sleeping, mooing, or
eating grass.
If anything, I'm saying Hasadiga, you know why?
Yeah.
Which was perhaps the only honest prayer I ever had. Occasionally there was a thank you that was honest. And I don't know what I'm thanking when I say that, but I will say thank you, Damien, for inviting me.
Thank you. And it's been it's been a pleasure talking to you. And bye.